Good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from, and welcome to this webinar about TR-069 and the road to the smart home. My name's Rob Gallagher. I'm Director of Research for Media, Entertainment and Consumer for Ovum, and I'll be leading this session. So as I say, I'll be leading the presentation, talking about some research that we've conducted in conjunction with the industry about TR-069 and the path towards a smart home. Then we'll be followed by a presentation from Peterhans of Axiros and Alfeo Pareschi of Axiros about TR-069 milestones and future requirements that really build on my presentation, give you a background of what's happening in the industry. And then finally, we're going to have a question and answer session joined by all the panelists plus Robin Mersh, who's CEO of the Broadband Forum, which of course is the organisation which manages the TR-069 protocol. So just to advise you, we will be taking questions throughout the session. They won't be audio questions. You can log your questions through the chat box. So I would encourage you to type in your question at any time, and then we can come to them at the end of the session. Okay, so to begin my presentation, first of all, I'd like to say a few quick words about Ovum and the future of the smart home project we've been running in conjunction with the industry. So Ovum is a global research and advisory firm which covers telecoms, media and IT, and all those places where those three sectors intersect. I manage the media section plus a large part of the consumer telecom section. So like many global research firms, we conduct research which is published off the shelf for our subscription clients, but we also conduct bespoke research in conjunction with our clients and the industry. So this project is one of those where we've been working with the industry, and it dates back a good few years. So the project actually had a first phase in 2012 when the Broadband commissioned Ovum to forecast TR-069 adoption. In 2014, we were approached by the Broadband Forum again to update our 2012 study. At that time, we agreed that the role of TR-069 and the advanced state of the industry meant that we wanted to shift our focus a little bit more, extend to looking beyond the issues of access and maintenance and providing good service to look at the smart home. So in conjunction with that progress project to update that study, we surveyed 250 industry executives, including 100 at service providers, about the future of TR-069 and the path to the smart home. Then in the third phase, we worked together with Axiros, the vendor which is involved in this webinar, to produce a white paper which looked at some of the results of that survey, plus a case study of one of the leading examples of a TR-069 deployment by Lisatelli, service provider and also utility in Norway. And then finally, the fourth phase, which is the one you will see today, is Ovum, Axiros and the Broadband Forum hosting a webinar to dive deeper into the project's findings. Okay, so many of you will be familiar with the TR-069 CPE1 management protocol, to give it its full title, but I'll just give a brief rundown for those who aren't, because it is a very important protocol, perhaps not one some are immediately aware of. So essentially it's a technical specification which defines a communication protocol that can enable broadband service providers to remotely configure devices, enable end-to-end delivery of new services, and then manage and support those devices and services. So you can see in the diagram, essentially by having a broadband router or gateway, which is controlled by an auto configuration server, which then is connected to various business logic modules such as OSS, BSS, service policy, CRM team, for example. And it can manage not only just router and gateways, but also other types of devices, either directly or by proxy. On the right, I've listed a number of the applications of TR-069. It's probably fair to say they're growing all the time, so I won't list them all, but key ones will be initially provisioning services, enabling consumers to self-install their own services, saying buying a router from a shop or getting it through the post, upgrading firmware, measuring performance. The list goes on, and as I say, it's constantly growing. Okay, so what did our survey say? So if you look here, 2 out of 5 service providers that we surveyed, and as I mentioned earlier, there was over 100, they confirmed that they were adopted TR-069. So, some were uncertain. As I mentioned, not everyone is familiar with this protocol, but there's quite a high vote of confidence when you look at the results of those who say yes. So you can see here it's being adopted throughout the world, obviously quite high in Europe and North American developed markets, but also in others that you might not expect, perhaps the Middle East and Africa. And what we also found is that it's really delivering real business benefits today. So you can see here, we asked what benefits has TR-069 brought to your organization. You can see that over 7 out of 10 said it enabled them to simplify their service delivery. 6 out of 10 has enabled them to resolve faults much faster. And nearly 6 out of 10 have said it's enabled them to lower installation costs. And then you can see some of the more advanced applications, still quite a lot of high take-up there. Okay, so we also asked a range of questions about the level of adoption by service providers, by device, today, where they think it was heading, what issues they were going to address, where they plan to go with it, and we fed that into our forecast model. And what we predict is that by 2016, the number of devices that are TR-069 enabled and in the market will pass 356 million devices. And this is particularly significant because this estimate of 269 million that we made for end 2014 marks an increase on the projection of 250 million that we made as part of our first study in 2012, which was commissioned by the Broadband Forum. So why are we forecasting an increase? Essentially, we think there are 3 technology megatrends which mean that service providers are essentially adopting TR-069 faster than the number of fixed broadband lines are growing and faster than the number of residential gateways are growing in the market. And those 3 technology megatrends are superfast broadband, multi-play bundling, and smart home and the Internet of Things. So on the next slide, we'll dig into our first megatrend, which is superfast broadband. So on the left, you can see that about now, the momentum behind consumers really replacing their current generation or previous generation broadband services, the basic ADSL, the DOCSIS 1.1, etc., with the next generation, say your VDSL, DOCSIS 3.0, fiber to the home based on GPON or point-to-point, is really starting to accelerate. And at the very least, this provides an opportunity for service providers to replace their old gateways, or gateways maybe they didn't manage and hadn't provided to the customer, with ones of their own and ones using TR-069. As we look deeper into the survey responses and contacts with service providers, we found that there were quite different trends, or related trends rather, for why service providers were looking to use TR-069 more and more in conjunction with these next generation broadband technologies. So, for example, VDSL, this technology is really being driven by service providers who want to roll out super fast broadband faster and sooner rather than later, thereby avoiding issues with deploying civil works and a lot of the expense involved with fiber to the home. So a key part of that strategy is making it very easy for the customer to adopt it. So one of the main reasons that service providers adopting VDSL are interested in TR-069 is the ability to offer self-install. So either consumer can get the device sent through the post, or there's minimal interaction needed or field sales visits from engineers. In addition, operators which have already rolled out or are rolling out GPON, fiber to the home, are really looking to lower their total cost of ownership. So everyone knows fiber to the home is an extremely expensive technology to deploy in all but a few urban areas. It can cost thousands of dollars per home. So any cost they can shave by reducing the ability to provision new services, to upgrade them, to remotely manage them, to solve faults, can only be good for those providers. So hence their interest in TR-069. And then final next generation access technologies, the move to DOCSIS 3.0. Particularly interesting as the history of TR-069, it was very much developed by telecoms and DSL operators, but we've seen growing interest from cable operators who very much see this as a way to better manage their services, particularly as they move to multi-play bundles that involve not just broadband, but voice and video. So this is touching on that issue that the cable operators are really looking to help or solve with TR-069, which is making multi-play work, making sure it helps them achieve their goals without adding to their problems. So you can see here our forecasts for bundles, and you can see in particular that triple play segment is really going to grow. And as you get to that segment, that's where things start to get really complicated, because you're not only managing the gateway, but you also might be managing voice over IP services and associated devices, of course the set-top box, but then also the devices which you can use to watch multi-screen video, which are growing by all the time. Related trends within this is what we see is increasingly aggressive moves by telcos to compete in the multi-play market. I think it's probably fair to say that many telcos didn't achieve the results with their first IPTV rollouts that they wanted to, but the reasons for doing so haven't changed. They still face intense competition from cable operators who are already very strong in TV, but also can roll out super fast broadband using DOCSIS 3 much faster than a telco can, where it has to upgrade part of its physical infrastructure, namely the cables. So we think telcos are going to compete increasingly aggressively, and they're looking beyond where they were traditionally competing. So they're looking beyond IPTV. So you can see in our forecast here that a good proportion of the subscribers are on technologies apart from IPTV. In addition to that, I think we'll see a lot of investment in over-the-top technologies where the management architecture is slightly different. We're also seeing them bundling aggressively and target the low end. I mean, what does this mean? Well, for TR-069, it means that it's going to be of increasing use for supporting those multi-play bundles, but also for supporting advanced TV set-top boxes and new low-cost devices that those operators will be using to target the high and the low end, respectively. So the third mega trend is the smart home. And many service providers we speak to are really starting to see this as what might be called the fifth play in the multi-play bundle. So alongside internet access, voice, video, and mobile, the smart home or a range of smart home services are the next element they add to plan to those bundles to gain new subscribers and increase the stickiness and reduce churn. So in terms of our survey respondents, we found a very high rate of interest. So you can see that up to 80% say they plan to offer home security services, nearly as many for home control, even more interestingly than multi-screen TV, which has been the next logical choice for many operators. So perhaps that sort of says something about operators' affinity with the services within the home, particularly those that are more utility-like. But the problem with the smart home is it provides or poses a range of new challenges that operators haven't really faced, even when you get to the triple and the quad play bundle. First of all, we think there's going to be a lot more involvement of third-party companies in the smart home services that come in smart home bundles from operators than there have been, say, compared to the approach they've had with voice or video, where operators have taken much more ownership over those services. So you can see this in our survey, in that over 60% of respondents stated that broadband operators will be one of the most influential types of organisation in terms of defining and enabling smart home services. They have a key advantage, of course, in that they provide the connectivity to home, which will always play a central role in services. But also when we ask them, what about the individual companies, which will be the most influential consumer-facing companies in defining and enabling smart home services, you can see that the first four aren't traditional service providers. We could call them over-the-top service providers at best. It's only when you get to number 5 in that list, AT&T, that it is a service provider. So it seems most of the industry recognises that companies like Google Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, who they of course do have partnerships with, but don't really control in the way they do with their traditional vendors, will have a major role in the smart home, which is a pretty new challenge for operators. This is something that our survey respondents recognise. So 7 out of 10 said that they plan to base their smart home service strategies on bundles that feature third-party branded services and devices. In other words, they're not going to go it alone. They really are going to want to work with increasingly complex environments. And this really brings up the importance of managing a quality broadband service and the role that operators of TR-069 can play. So we found that this is quite a risky investment, despite the logic that operators see in moving to smart home as the fifth play. So 44% identified customer willingness to pay for smart home services as a major barrier. Cost of devices was not far behind. And finally, establishing interoperability. So given those factors, it's very important that operators get it right, and we believe that managing a quality broadband service, and particularly using the home gateway to do that, will be key to that. Okay, so here you can see what our survey respondents have said about what role they think TR-069 will play in the smart home. And you can see that generally they think it's going to play quite a big role. So again, home security, home control, home energy management coming out quite high. Broadly, maps with the interest that they've shown in other services. And overall, when we asked all of the survey respondents, that includes vendors, other industry watchers, 80% of survey respondents stated that the TR-069 protocol will play a significant role in their smart home strategies. Okay, so one of the areas that we also touched on was virtualization. So I think at the time we were conducting the survey, this was quite a new area. So we didn't spend too much on it, but it one that certainly in the project team, as we thought about it more and more, is going to play a more and more important role in the smart home, and also the role that TR-069 plays in this. So for those of you who aren't familiar with virtualization, the term is commonly used to talk about when you take certain physical elements, often in hardware, and you virtualize them in the network. So in terms of this study, we asked, did any of your organization plan to virtualize any home broadband service features by resourcing and managing them within the network instead of within the customer premises equipment or the TV set-top box? You can see, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty about that because it was a fairly new concept when we were asking this question. But you can also see that there's quite a resounding vote in terms of 44% saying yes. Why we think that that's particularly interesting is that the smart home, at the moment, it's a concept that we're all familiar with, but what it will actually look like is something that we can't be sure of, and we think that it's going to develop extremely rapidly. So, for example, the ability to virtualize certain functions, have them in the network instead of the customer premises, could be extremely important because we simply don't know what services are around the corner. So that role of virtualization would be very important. So then we asked if the survey respondents thought virtualization of certain home broadband-related services will result in your organization using TR-069 more or less. About 32% more, and 36% said about the same, but in conjunction with other management protocol. So to summarize, service providers say that TR-069 is bringing real business benefits today. I think that came very clear from our survey. Furthermore, we believe that the move to superfast broadband and multiplay will accelerate adoption. So we are going to see the rate of TR-069 adoption growing faster than the number of fixed broadband subscriptions, for example, and the number of residential gateways. We really do think there's a lot of momentum behind it now. As a result, we think the number of TR-069 enabled devices in use will pass 356 million in 2016, Again, this is an upgrade on our previous forecast. And part of this will be driven by the smart home, but that smart home will pose new device management challenges. That said, we think that that keeping control of the residential gateway will be critical. It will be about managing a quality service and assisting the consumer and the third-party service providers in making smart home services work and be as pain-free as possible. Finally, we think that TR-069 is well placed to support the burgeoning Internet of Things. And sort of see that this concept of remote management becomes very interesting when you start to think about virtualizing services in the network, and the fact that perhaps many of the smart home services which will come to be familiar in a few years' time may be not known to us today. So the ability to use TR-069 to deploy, support and manage those services could be very important in terms of this Internet of Things that we are moving towards. So now I think I'll hand over to Kurt and Alfeo, where they'll talk about various milestones that TR-069 has reached and the future requirements they're hearing from their customers.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, and hello everybody listening to this webinar. My name is Kurt Peterhans. I'm CEO and Managing Director Operations at Axiros. Axiros is offering device management solutions based on TR-069 and beyond. This we do for our worldwide customer base, and this we do since 2002 already, so for more than 13 years meanwhile. Just to give you a rough idea, Axiros offered the first carrier-grade TR-069 ACS already back in 2004. Since this time, we have built a worldwide customer base of more than 200 service providers meanwhile, who built their TR-069 ecosystem based on our platform. So let me give you my view on TR-069 first, a short overview of the past and present. My colleague Alfeo Pareschi will then give you some insight from his experience what it takes for the smart home. So what is this TR-069 about, and what is the TR-069 claim? TR-069 is a technical specification from the Broadband forum. First time published, I think it was in May 2004 already. It is good to manage large-scale end-user devices centrally from remote. Typically, we see in our projects service providers, operators managing from 5,000 devices up to 5 million devices from all kind of device manufacturers with all kind of firmware on it. So, since this time, the protocol has been constantly refined and enriched. At the moment, we are looking at version 1.4 with amendment 5. When I say management of end-user devices, this means nowadays all kind of internet access devices, routers, modems, gateways, plus all the devices in the home, set-top boxes, VoIP phones, that kind of stuff. When I say management of these end-user devices, this means above all provisioning, reprovisioning, firmware management, monitoring of quality of experience, integration into support for the first level, for the second level, to touch all these kind of devices, and above all, to collect all kind of information available directly on these devices in the field. So, what about the past? As said, this TR-069 protocol is around since May 2004. On a constant base, the Broadband Forum was innovating and enriching this protocol. So there have been amendments in 2006, 2007, 2010, 2011, and now since November 2013, we are looking at version 1.4. So it's a well-maintained protocol. From 2004 in the beginning to 2015, it evolved from a static management of fixed-line DSL networks, from my point of view, to the de facto standard protocol for large-scale network independent management of all kinds of devices. This as an access agnostic protocol applicable across all types of access operators. So we see them in the cable market, we see them in the DSL market, even satellite, and also fiber networks are using this protocol to manage the devices. So the presence, around 25% of all broadband lines worldwide are nowadays managed by TR-069. We see nearly no greenfield left nowadays, means nearly all operators, all service providers worldwide do run to a certain extent already a kind of TR-069 ACS ecosystem. We see a very fast growing amount of device manufacturers who are enriching their functionality with TR-069. And we see in nearly all major device tenders, meanwhile, the request for TR-069 capability, and this not as a nice to have, but more and more as a real must. TR-069 also, meanwhile, endorsed by all kind of the major industry standardization groups, like 3GPP, Small Cell Forum, Home Gateway Initiative, the WiMAX Forum. So they all are somehow using TR-069 as a building block, also in their concepts. So as a conclusion, TR-069 made its way from DSL routers to all kinds of internet access devices, to the residential home, to smart gateways, and the connected home. What I have here with me is a success story from Iscon. It's a very fresh success story. Iscon is a daughter of Deutsche Telekom AG, a service provider in Croatia, and they deployed a TR-069 ecosystem late 2014 to manage their VoIP gateways, VoIP routers, VoIP modems, all the devices from Pattern, the smart nodes. And immediately, within 3 months after going live, they saw the benefit. So time to provision a customer went down from before 10 minutes, now to 5 minutes. The cost to provision a customer also was reduced by more than 100%. And the time to troubleshoot, so the 400% here are not correct, it should be 200%, but it has been reduced from 4 hours to 1 hour. And this is an official success story from Iscon, which is very fresh. And if you need also to build up a business case for TR-069, it's worth to look into this success story. So also where to go if you need to make a jump start for TR-069. Here is a collection of quite useful links. If you want to find out more about the technology, if you want to find out more what is going on in this TR-069 domain, and also some links from the Broadband Forum, and this link from the device manufacturer, the use case, the business case from Iscon. So let me hand over here to my colleague Alfeo Pareschi, who is responsible for the strategy inside Axiros, and he will give you some insights what it means about TR-069 when it comes to smart home.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Here we want just to go over some of the business challenges for smart home deployments after having learned about the adoption of TR-069 in the smart home services. When looking at the smart home deployments in the market, what we found was that there were several challenges for the service provider. First thing is supporting products which have traditionally been designed for off-the-shelf sales on the retail chain. Customer care has one of the challenge, the time to market, in terms of being able to deploy products into a consistent infrastructure for the service provider, which also includes operational support system and business support system when these products lack the integration facilities required for an end-to-end process delivery. The supply chain, which comes from the need to integrate various manufacturers into a consistent delivery chain, which takes into account the coordination, pre-configuration, deployment, integration of these products into the home, ranging from energy products, appliance control products, alarming products, in a way that they cooperate nicely together. And these challenges go together with the risk for the service provider to lose business to over-the-top provider. We saw before in the research that when looking at the companies which are going to be influential in the smart home deployments, the first 4 companies are actually over-the-top provider. If we consider Google, not for Google Fiber, but for all the other kind of businesses they run, then we have Apple, Google, Samsung, and Microsoft, and AT&T comes only 5th in the list. On top of it, we are seeing challenges coming from the regulatory compliance in Europe, in US, in the majority of the Asian countries, and the data privacy, and the need to become open to diversity suppliers. So the need to integrate devices coming from different vendors in a way that the consumer has a chance to choose what they want. So all of these challenges face the deployment of smart home services in the service provider space. What's the role for TR-069 in this? From our experience in deploying these products in the service provider space, we see the advantage of TR-069 and the ability to extend the remote procedure call and web services to all devices in the premise. There's a major advantage in the fact that it encourages interoperability via data models. This is a major topic in the Internet of Things. Once the communication challenge has been solved by selection of a handful of communication protocols, the next challenge comes from making the data representation interoperable across different vendors and different devices. And this has been a key topic in TR-069 since the very beginning. The strong security framework that TR-069 provides opens up a solution to the theme related to data privacy and the way that the critical services are accessed. We're not talking about managing the appliances. We are talking about the alarming features. We are talking about services related to healthcare and the support for elderly people. And this is the space where the service provider can play their role in the competition against the over-the-top, as they have all the processes and infrastructure in place to offer business continuity to services which are not commoditized, but that they are life-critical and business-critical. And the point that TR-069 is designed for extreme scalability, being based on protocol that runs the Internet. So in summary and to conclude, what do we see from the market as the next step? We see a lot of requests to extend the adoption into constrained devices with very low resources and capabilities so that they cooperate in a coordinated way into the key processes of provisioning, assurance, and restoration. We see requests for support within the same service for a heterogeneous network, which is critical to ensure that we have a consistent experience from the same premise whenever the premise is connected through cellular, a satellite link, a radio mesh, or a broadband connection over wireline. A request for support in the application distribution and application control, as in the entire environment for Internet of Things, the request to have multiple applications running on the same appliance is becoming critical. And also the request to have the adoption design and the implementation design to be multi-sided. And by multi-sided, we mean no longer service provider centric, as there will be multiple players playing the role for smart home, in the Internet of Things. And these providers can be utilities and can be healthcare institutions and can be all kind of providers which are targeted to a specific customer segment. And to finish up on this, we see requests for improvements on notification, adding real-time support, deterministic behavior, and light rate to be able to deliver this functionality over a constrained network.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Alfeo, and thanks very much, Kurt. So now we're going to open up to questions and answers. So just to remind you, as one of the stages of these projects, Ovum worked with Axiros to author a white paper about the efficient and automated smart home rollouts, a case study on one of the most innovative deployments, and you can see a link on the slide here that will enable you to access that white paper. So to move on to questions, as well as Kurt and Alfeo and myself, we're also joined by Mersh, the CEO of the Broadband Forum. And so I'm going to start with a question for you, Kurt. Obviously you're working with a lot of clients in this sector. You seem to have a pretty good view of what's going on. What would you say are the kinds of use cases that service providers are asking most for today? What are the real life challenges and deployments that they want to tackle now?
Okay, thank you. So in the early times, clear enough, the standard use cases always have been initial provisioning of a device, when rollout, firmware management, that kind of stuff. In the last 2 to 3 years, the operators and service providers worldwide ask now to enable their already existing TR-069 ecosystem also for quality of experience monitoring. Means they all have done significant investments in building such a TR-069 ecosystem, and now they recognize that this ecosystem can also be used perfectly for monitoring voice and video quality parameters, not just real-time monitoring, but also to give a historic view on quality. So these are use cases which come around more and more since 2 to 3 years. Everything around quality of experience, monitoring, to do this based on TR-069. Thank you.
Okay. And a question for you, Alfeo, which we didn't touch on particularly much in this presentation, given its smart home focus. But what do you see as the needs and adoption of TR-069 in the enterprise segment?
The advantage of TR-069 in process optimization for provisioning and assurance is now recognized not just for the CPE targeted to the consumer market, but also to the small and large enterprise customer. We see that becoming crucial for service activation and monitoring of enterprise voice and media services. These same services are becoming relevant in the delivery of a number of Internet of Things products. Think about surveillance, environmental control, where the flexibility and extensibility of TR-069 is starting to be recognized as a major advantage.
And to move back to the smart home, got a question here. I think perhaps I can answer and Robin can as well, which is, so why would a customer choose a service provider for smart home services as opposed to a Google or another company? The thought being, if there's an internet connection, then any company could, in theory, provide those services over the top as they do. And before handing over to Robin to talk about the role he sees in TR-069 playing in managing services that consumers are driving and those provided by service providers, I'd like to give my take on the strategy piece. And I mean, I think it's not necessarily the case that the customer would choose their service provider instead of a Google or a Samsung or an Apple. I think they'll choose them in addition and often in conjunction. So a major theme of our research for the past few years is about partnership models, those between service providers and device manufacturers, for example, particularly those between the more consumer-facing consumer electronics firms, but also between service providers and over-the-top firms. And despite the industry debate and rhetoric, partnerships are being struck between service providers and over-the-top companies all the time. It literally runs in the hundreds of deals per quarter, according to our market tracking. And, we think the same is going to happen in the smart home market. We've already seen huge amounts of partnering around music, streaming particularly. There's more partnering around social networking and messaging. And what's really happening this year will be video, and we think smart home will be a part of that. And it's not necessarily about any, technical capability that service provider has or the OTT provider has. It's about, what's the best way to enter into a relationship with the customer, whether that's paying or to get the customer to adopt your device or service. And service providers have a huge advantage in that they have millions of paying subscribers today. The common thing every smart home service has, it will need an internet connection. And as we've seen in other markets, there's no better way to get customers subscribed is to enter into that bundling relationship. So Robin, perhaps you'd like to add a few words about the role of TR-069 in bridging or brokering that relationship between those devices and services that consumers might go out and purchase and those provided by the service provider.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and hello, everyone. I'm pleased that everyone could come onto this call and look at this research. I think maybe one thing that's worth sort of saying, just to add to what you said, because I do agree with you, Rob. There's, I think there's always going to be retail and over-the-top services are always going to feature as part of broadband strategy. That's always going to be the case, and I think you're right in saying that you're going to see more partnering happening as we go further and further into richer smart home services. But and again, I would agree with you that I think broadband absolutely plays a key role here, and I think you can see absolutely solid evidence for this in what exactly happened with Google just a few years ago. The fact that they moved into deploying fiber themselves and becoming a broadband provider says everything about what they also believe to be the central role of the actual the access piece of the network. So I think probably the key thing that we need to do from a technology point of view is to enable this kind of collaboration or directly selling services by the broadband provider. That needs to be enabled through the technology. So this has been the key focus for a lot of the recent work within the Broadband Forum. Has been about what differences do we see between traditionally what TR-69 or what originally TR-69 was developed to support, which was basically zero-touch provisioning to reduce truck rolls for broadband deployment, to sort of take away those kind of sort of issues. But that was a fairly sort of straightforward process in a lot of ways. It was something that we achieved, I think, extremely effectively. But what we've been dealing with for the last few years has really been to look at these kind of very different services with different demands on the network and different kind of issues that we needed to resolve. And one of the key areas is the fact that there are so many different protocols involved in the smart home. You can sort of say it can be a little bit of the Wild West at sort of times, where you're seeing a number of different protocols being used, particularly in the area of retail equipment. And of course, all of these things touch the network, so the operators have a keen interest in at least, if not directly managing the device, they need to know what's been connected to the network, what kind of demands are on the network, whether there are issues being, created by, different devices. But maybe this is going to go through as we go into the future of the smart home. Maybe what we need to start looking at is, who actually needs to control these devices. And of course, for many of these retail pieces of equipment, these are controlled obviously by the end user, by the consumer, and that's what they want. But they also maybe want to be able to use these in different ways, and it's not just a question of traditional telecoms management. Maybe it's a question of user control, and I think this is kind of where it's going to get interesting. Is I think those two things are coming together. So there's different people needing to touch these devices and services, and how do you integrate these things? Because I think if you're the consumer, you don't really care what the protocols are. You don't really care where any of this stuff comes from. You just want ease of use. And that, I think, is the key challenge, is how do we make the smart home both very open to different devices, different services, to make it truly kind of plug and play, and really get the maximum use and maximum flexibility out of those services. And that's a key question, and I think that's one of the things that the Broadband Forum is very keen to work on.
Well, we've got an enormous amount of questions, so I'll try and focus on those which can bring the most to the broad base of the audience. We will take those others offline and endeavour to answer those via email. But I'll pick one, and it's about messaging. And here it is. So a caller or webinar participant says, do I understand you right in that you see TR-069 not only as a maintenance protocol, but also as a carrier of messages? And if so, does the Axiros solution support message handling, including the business logic needed for that? Either of you gents from Axiros would like to take that?
Hi, Rob, I can take this very quickly. And you'll be amazed how much messaging has already been done over TR-069. I can mention, for instance, that the entire recommendation and campaign for marketing running on the largest cable network nowadays, which is Liberty Global EPC in Europe, is using TR-069 to provide recommendation services on the set-top boxes. I can also add things related to the collection of the metering data, the notifications coming from using active and passive, which is a mechanism available in TR-069 since the beginning. And as late as in Norway, where we have our largest deployment of smart home, the fire alarm controls for houses is currently done using notifications run through the TR-069. Just a few examples.
Okay. And another question, Axiros mentioned that you see TR-069 deployments of up to 5 million CPE, but the Internet of Things and the smart home could increase those deployments by tenfold. How does Axiros see an ACS deployment scaling to so many managed devices?
It's again Alfeo speaking here. It's very quickly said. Nowadays, and in Internet of Things, we see basically two types of devices, and we expect to see distributed logic to be deployed. So the figure of 5 million relates to the current available deployments. I mean, the biggest ones that we see right now are in the range of a little bit more than that, in the range of 10 millions, but with limited functionality to provisioning. And this is going to change very quickly by distributing part of the logic for the ACS. For instance, we've already separated the monitoring and analytics from the provisioning part in a way that this scaling can be achieved quite easily.
Okay. And a question for you, Robin. The respondent is saying, what kind of initiatives are there available to reduce TR-069 fragmentation of implementations? And they're saying that it can take too long to fine-tune any commercial implementation. What's your view on that view?
Well, I think it probably depends on exactly which versions of TR-69 have been deployed. But this is sort of something we've worked on over the years with the different amendments and then the different configuration of the data models which are used with TR-069. So some of the more recent developments over the last few years have really worked to really sort of segment much more how we deliver those data models, so how you actually manage the devices. And I'd really encourage anyone on this webinar actually to go onto the Broadband forum site. There are a number of tools that can be used, not just obviously the TRs themselves, and where you can actually go to see the data models and download all of this work, because it's all freely available. There are also a number of white papers that look at best practice, but we are actually working further on best practice at the moment, and we hope to have some more things out in the near future. There's another sort of thing worth mentioning, though, is the fact that we have now a certification program, which we haven't mentioned, so far in this webinar, but we had a certification program that what it basically certifies at the moment is how a device would use the TR-069 protocol. So is it actually using it in the correct way? That certification program is growing. It's a certification of CPE. If you want to sort of see, I would sort of suggest less fragmentation and more robustness in how the protocol is used, and then how the data models are used. I would suggest looking at that list, and I would certainly encourage any vendors to be, looking at sort of certifying as part of their strategy, because it's certainly so true that at the beginning with TR-069, it was, and we have made very, very good headway. But there's no doubt, as you're developing a protocol, there's you learn as you go along. We now have much more in the way of best practice. The other thing I would sort of suggest as well is actually to be involved, because if you go into the Broadband Home Working Group, which looks after TR-069, absolutely has all of the experts in this field. If you really want to sort of understand how things are developing, that's the place to be involved.
Well, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'd like just to round up with one final question. As mentioned earlier, myself and the other panelists will endeavour to respond to any questions we're not able to speak to in this session. But this one hopefully sums up quite a few of the responses, and which is, where do the panelists see TR-069 being used in smart home developments, either existing deployments you could speak about today or what's coming next? Where do you see those first applications coming through? Well, TR-069 will play a really key role. Perhaps Kurt, you'd like to answer that. I know you focus on one in the white paper that we published in conjunction with you.
I will very briefly state that, as I mentioned before, TR-069 is a strong enabler for companies which do not own the network to be able to provide these services in a way that they provide configuration, management, monitoring, and support. So this is where our customers in the utility see the use of TR-069.
Yeah, this is Robin. I think there's going to be a number of sort of places where I think you could sort of see TR-069 being used. I mean, obviously it's going to be in any, particularly the devices which an operator is going to be, obviously, directly managing. That's obviously where the highest interest would be, but not obviously just restricted to that. But if you look at those devices that could be, managed, you just need to look at where operators are going today. So you're seeing things like, home security seems to be an area. Certainly, we're seeing a lot more operators starting to do business and bundling services to some level. I think you probably will also see, some other kinds of areas that maybe are have some similarities. So maybe things like, healthcare could be an interesting, area that could be sort of worth investigating. But I think it all really sort of comes down to that, where the operators sort of see some of the real business value, because TR-069 really is already in a position. I mean, I said earlier that I think there are still things that need to develop, and there are still issues that need to be resolved, and certainly some bigger technical questions. But today TR-069 can do an awful lot of things in terms of managing devices and maintaining and diagnosing issues. I think maybe a lot of the questions come down to are more commercial in nature, actually, rather than sort of technical. It's really where commercially we see the operators heading, and that's why I sort of think that things like home security are the more obvious places. I think you may see more in terms of multimedia, so maybe some kind of app store ideas, or things like sort of music downloads, that you might see that becoming a much bigger feature within the home. But yeah, I think it probably is more of a commercial question, and really sort of TR-069 is already there to take advantage of some of these ideas as they sort of come forward. And that's what I'd really, I think, encourage, is that this is a protocol that's already very robust, very widespread. And I think, going back to the point you made, Rob, is the fact of the matter is there are so many subscribers and so many devices that are already managed. This is a base of customers who can take full advantage of where TR-069 could go. And I think that's the most exciting sort of thing, is that I think TR-069 has already proved itself very capable of answering a lot of business issues for operators, and it could be used even more today.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll truly wrap up then. The question of watch this space, I guess. As mentioned, we published a white paper with Axiros about this. There are also plenty of resources on our website and the Broadband Forum website, so I'd encourage you to dig in and enjoy those. As mentioned, we'll do our best to answer the number of questions that came up that we weren't able to address in this session. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for dialing in, and also thank all of my industry colleagues who took part in this presentation for their contribution. Thank you very much.